Boker Tov. Welcome to our Friday morning Torah study. We're hoping there are folks joining us on the podcast as well as we study this week's Torah portion, Metzorah, from the book of Leviticus. I've told you many times that I stay within the triennial reading so that I can stay honest about confronting texts that are not necessarily the favorite ones in the world to study. This week is probably the paradigm, right, of that model of keeping myself honest. Because if there's one text I could avoid ever studying, it would be this one. Where we're starting Metzorah. Tazria and Metzorah are read together. So I'm going to talk about them a little bit before we look at the text itself. Tazria and Metzorah are a double portion, so they're read together unless and until there's a leap month added to the Jewish calendar, in which case they are separated. Because we add 4 Shabbatot. When we add Adar, a second Adar, we add 4 Sabbaths during which we need to read. So the rest of the year, Tazria and Metzorah come together. And so this year we're reading Metzorah as the third year cycle triennial reading. Let's say a bracha for our study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, God, Spirit of the universe, who makes us holy with your commandments and commands that we engage with words of Torah. So, I don't have a blackboard. Or a whiteboard even. So, if we take a minute to think about where these texts originate, if we take a minute to think about the system in which they originate, it is the system that is very much concerned with purity. It is very much concerned with holiness as a spatial, physical issue. Literally. It is spatial in that once sin happens, the space is contaminated by that sin. And sin, the energy, the dross of sin is drawn to the sancta. So the important thing in the Israelite system, in the ancient Near Eastern mindset, was to continually cleanse the sanctified area and the Israelite camp of tum'ah, of impurity, both from sin and from just things that happen. So if we've defined, which we have together, if we've defined impurity as essentially a state of spiritual otherness, non-normalcy, what we don't realize in the Western world, it now, in the contemporary Western world, is that for the ancients, that was a force that was communicable.
Contagious.
It
was contagious.
It was contagious, yes. So for them, if you're in a state of otherness for some reason, you need to honor that state and not bring it into the place of the norm, because it contaminates the normal space with tum'ah, with otherness. So if we want to read, as some anthropologists do, the priestly system of tum'ah, of impurity, as somehow being connected to death, right? That the life force, life is holy, right? That is the life, life for us is always holy. All life is holy. What is the antithesis of that? Is death. And so contact with death is otherizing, is somehow unlifing. So you don't want to bring that into the life of the community, right? It needs to be honored as something other, not bad, right? Otherness caused from natural, normal contact with those things that might be impure is not necessarily bad. It doesn't belong in the state of kedusha, of holiness, and it doesn't belong in the normal life of the community. There are some kinds of tum'ah which carry an implication that we might call negative, which is sin causes contamination that repels holiness. It repels the force of Kedusha. The danger with that is that, oh yeah, thank you. Is that God, thank you, Carol, God is all Kedusha. God is only holiness. Thank you so much. So when we're looking at the Torah text, what we're doing is in the imagination of the Israelites who are living in a temple priestly system. They are living a cultic system in the time of the temple. But they're imagining a time in the desert where you have the tabernacle, right? You've got the Holy of Holies. You've got the altar. And you've got lots of other stuff that goes along with this as part of the sancta. You have then the Israelites camped all around the tabernacle, right? Tribes, all the way out. So when an Israelite sins against another Israelite, there's a charge that's released that is drawn to the sancta. This is happening all the time. All the time. So what is the way that this is dealt with? You get the life force. What's the life force? Blood. Blood is used to cleanse this space of all of that contamination. That is the point of sacrifice. That's the point. Now, there are normal, natural things that happen that also have to do with death in life. Give me some examples. Birth. Why does birth have something to do with death?
Because it initiates the process.
It initiates what process?
Death.
It initiates the process of a living being coming into the world which will someday die. And what about the mother?
Unclean.
She's unclean, so that we're going to go there. But what is the death business with mother in birth?
Well, in biblical times, many women were dying.
You'd better believe it. Mother is walking the line between the living and the dead because of the risk of death. What happened to infants in the ancient world? They died. You had a 50-50 shot of making it to the age of 5. Right? So, both mother and baby are dealing with the very, very real possibility of dying in the ancient world. And there's some who want to say the reason the tum'ah, the period of impurity that is caused by this contact with the death reality, that it's longer for a woman giving birth to a girl because she's going to have a girl who's also going to go through these exact risks. Yes? A boy won't.
What
All
about
right.
the menstrual cycle?
The menstrual cycle. Any guesses?
Blood.
Well, it's the,
Blood, death.
the ovaries.
What's the connection to death and blood and menstruation?
The passing of an egg.
Well, did they know? But did they know?
That there was no pregnancy. That's what they knew.
Oh.
There should have been, but there wasn't.
So there was the death of a possible life, of a potential life.
So was that the concept behind the red tent? They were separated from the community?
Yes. Yes.
Ooh.
So we're going there. So,
And yet they
birth,
used blood to cleanse the sancta area, but in the case of a woman bleeding, it's seen totally differently.
this is not lost on lots of folk, particularly feminist scholars, who want to say, now, wait just a second.
Yeah.
If blood is a purification
Right.
agent,
Right.
very convenient, though, that, a woman's menstrual cycle is a contaminant.
Yeah.
How does that work? So one could argue that it is witch blood. We don't use human blood, God forbid, for this ritual. We use animal blood. That there is a difference between blood as ritual detergent and blood that is evidence of a lost potential life. Those are different. Would be this argument. And I'm not trying to sell you on this argument. I'm trying to say this is one way people have tried to understand the ancient mind, right? The ancient understanding of the world. And it makes to me some sense. If death is the antithetical force to life and was one of the major issues for them, right? We don't deal with it. They lived a life a lot closer to the possibilities, of death. Then I think it's something to think about. Like, it's just a way for us to even get our heads around a system like this without going, ew. To just try to understand where they're coming from. All right. So all of these things initiate tum'ah, impurity. The highest form of impurity is caused by contact with a human corpse. Right? A dead person is the highest level of tum'ah that happens. Birth is next. Menstruation, because it's so regular. What else causes tum'ah? What about for men?
Male discharge.
Discharge for males. Right? So discharge for male or female causes impurity.
Then how do you have sex?
You have sex and you become impure until evening. You do mikvah and are impure until evening.
And then aren't there also discharges of the skin?
So there are.
Not just sexual.
That's right.
But also
So
discharges of the skin.
So we would say, eruptions
Yeah.
on the skin.
Boils.
Leprosy.
Yes, certainly. This whole parsha, Tazria, is about what's been mistakenly called leprosy for thousands of years. And the Metzorah is the person who has that condition, right? Tazria is the condition. The Metzorah is the one who has that. So in this system, it's very important to understand when one is impure. The priests really needed to know when somebody was impure because it's contaminating. So if you bring it into the space, now you're going to spread it. So this is Leviticus. This is the book that this is what the priests need to be concerned with. It's their manual. So that's why it's here. So we're looking at their manual for knowing about all of this. All right. So what happens when one is a Metzorah? What happens when one is in this place of being able to communicate impurity? One must be separated from normal, regular life. Right? You have to go outside the camp until such time as you can go through the rituals of re-entry. Right? So these are not permanent states. These are states that happen. How do you have sex, you asked, right? You're supposed to have sex. You're supposed to bury your kinspeople who die. So that's how we know this cannot mean bad. It can't. You're supposed to give birth. You're gonna menstruate, right? So it can't mean bad. So the folks who want to turn to menstruation always to say this is proof of misogyny, the trouble is, for a seminal emission, it's the same impurity, right? For sex, it's the same. For intimacy, it's the same impurity that we're talking about. It's not just menstruation. So for them, it meant a time of otherness, a time of being outside of the camp until one goes through the rituals of purification and return.
So, excuse me, so women had to do this every month?
Yes.
Even Orthodox today.
This is one of the, right, this is one of the
Yeah.
family, this is family purity laws that are still in place in the Orthodox world
I was
today.
just gonna say that.
So they do not have contact with their husbands or anyone else in the,
But the man won't touch
The-
any women, period,
because if he doesn't touch his wife all of a sudden, what is he announcing to the world? So he never touches her. Or any woman. You don't touch any woman because you don't know, right? And it's not appropriate to be touching other women anyway,
right.
says traditional Judaism. You shouldn't be touching, why are you touching any women? You shouldn't. It leads to dancing, right?
And we don't want that.
Wearing tali toed at the wall.
Hmm?
And
Right, it can lead to wearing tali toed at the wall.
And so every time you have sex, you then have to have a mikvah?
Yeah.
You go before,
Huh?
wait, no, after menstruation you go. to the
Yes. So she's
This is
asking, every
before
time there's
sex.
intercourse, do you just one have to go to the mikveh? In this system, yes.
Wow.
In this system, yes. Now this is where it gets ironic about menstruation, is that's the one that has survived post-temple, not intercourse
Interesting.
or night emissions for men.
Yeah.
We don't hear anything about that. But the menstruant, that is in full effect, right? So this is where some feminist scholars say, wait a minute, right? That's not, how does that happen? When actually the Torah text is more stringent about seminal emissions than menstruation. So then how is it that it's more strident in the Torah and yet it disappears as normative?
At what point did most of this become non-operative? Since it didn't happen at the temple, was the temple necessary for these purification?
So presumably, yes, that sacrifice.
But going out of the idea of going out of the camp and being impure until evening and that kind of thing, did that die with the second temple, or was that a gradual?
So that ends when one no longer has a means by which to purify.
So all the purification had to take place at the temple.
Correct.
There was no other way.
The system collapses
Okay.
with the destruction of the temple. Now, having said that, what stayed in place were those things which, according to Torah, went past the camp. Or past the sancta, the central.
Because there was some things
Sanctified
where
space.
like that person shall be impure until evening,
Right.
where you don't need the temple for that.
So family purity laws,
Right.
the Kohen staying in a state of ritual purity and not having contact with a corpse, those things have stayed in place.
That's, a Kohen doesn't go to a cemetery.
Correct. So people who trace their roots to Kohanim, to priests, do not go to cemeteries. They do not go in the funeral parlor. There's a glass partition that they stand behind so that they are not in the room with the corpse.
Rabbi, I'm having trouble distinguishing between inappropriate behavior, which you say is not sinful, and sinful behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Sinful behavior is bad,
Yes.
okay, and inappropriate behavior is not. It's just different.
So it's not inappropriate. It's not inappropriate to become ritually impure to bury your grandfather. That's not inappropriate. It's a mitzvah. We're commanded to bury our dead. And when we
One
do...
of the things that you talked about, you said are other but not bad.
Right.
And
Like illness, somebody getting ill.
like what?
Illness, right?
So like intercourse. You're impure. That's not bad. You're other,
Okay.
right? Because hopefully intimacy, sexual intimacy in particular between partners, is an otherizing experience, right? Birth, you are impure for weeks as a woman. But it's not bad.
Oh, I didn't think of it like that.
Ask a new mother about her state after giving birth. She'll tell you it's quite other.
Yes, exactly.
It is quite other. So I'm going to give you a piece that by Rabbi Rachel Rosenblatt that talks about that, and one by Rabbi Tirza Firestone. So we're going to start here, and then we're going to quickly move. into what the tradition has done with this concept going forward. All right, so where are we?
Are we 15:1?
We are, yes.
1454?
That's the red book.
No, I was.
So now I want you to imagine, as we read this, I want you to imagine that we are talking about E. coli.
What?
Chapter 15, verse 1.
Okay, right. 666 in the Hertz.
665.
15 verse 1 would be
The Lord spoke to Moses.
page 665.
Yes.
Think about that, right?
I feel dirty just looking at it.
That's different, Carol. That's a different issue. All right, someone want to read?
Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any man has a discharge issuing from his member, he is impure. The impurity from his discharge shall mean the following: whether his member runs with the discharge or is stopped up so that there is no discharge. His impurity means this: any bedding on which the one with the discharge lies shall be impure, and every object on which he sits shall be impure. All those who touch his bedding shall wash their clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening. All those who sit on an object on which the one with the discharge has sat shall wash their clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening. All those who touch the body of the one with the discharge shall wash their clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening. If the one with the discharge spits on someone who is pure, the latter shall wash those clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening. Any means for riding that the one with the discharge has mounted shall be impure. All those who touch anything that was under him shall be impure until evening, and all those who carry such things shall wash their clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening. All those whom the one with the discharge touches, without having rinsed his hands in water, shall wash their clothes, bathe in water, and remain impure until evening. An earthen vessel that the one with the discharge touches shall be broken, and any wooden implement shall be rinsed with water.
Do you get a sense of the urgency of this? Wow. Think about the AIDS epidemic. Kids who went to school who were HIV positive, and other kids wouldn't touch the playground equipment that those kids had been on. That is what we're dealing with, right? An understanding of the power of something invisible, but there, and very real, right?
How do doctors deal with this?
How do doctors deal with this? My bet is that they get it. They understand, right? Look at doctors that walk around like this and open doors with their elbows. They understand the incredible need to stay pure of the invisible contaminants that mean death in life or seriously compromised life, right? You get really sick. They get this. Now, of course, they would scoff and laugh, many of them, at the idea that there's a spiritual force that does this, or that normal physical processes cause that, of course. But I think we get the power of, if you understand this to be a real force, then the vigilance, you can see the vigilance. Now, the other thing I want to point out is, when we started here, partly on purpose, because look at the contamination factor, and it's men. I really want to point that out.
Yeah.
This whole system is often called misogynistic. I'm not going to argue about it. I'm just going to point out that it's just as vigorously, right, stringent about men contaminating something they sit on, right? Or spitting on somebody, right? They communicate just as much ritual impurity as a woman in her condition. So
A note here in the Hertz says that this is talking about discharges that are a result of illness or infection.
that
Not
is the
natural
assumption here.
discharge.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It is not.
That's right.
seminal-
That's why the word is not emission. It is.
Okay, that it's a okay, so here you're talking about what we would consider to be someone who
Is
who has
dealing
an
with
illness that
yes.
you can see.
right, because we're just coming out of the discussion of
Right.
tzara'at, what's been called leprosy. So we're talking about all kinds of conditions that.
And it has the same here.
Hmm?
It's talking about gonorrhea. Or
Right.
Right, exactly.
And these actually some pretty sensible, I mean, from a medical standpoint, this is pretty sensible.
Yeah.
Right?
That-
Wash your
that
hands.
They must have had a sense that there was,
Something wrong,
that could be communicated.
and in some cases they would not have been wrong.
This is not an ejaculate, this is.
No.
Correct.
this is- No.
That's later,
Okay.
right? That's 16. That's verse 16. But let's look at the purification ritual, 13.
When one with a discharge becomes purified of his discharge, he shall count off 7 days for his purification, wash his clothes and bathe his body in fresh water.
Every day?
No,
Doesn't say.
on the
On the seventh
after
day?
7 days.
Oh, okay.
Then he shall be pure. On the 8th day, he shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons and come before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting and give them to the priest. The priest shall offer them, the one as a purification offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the priest shall make expiation on his behalf for his discharge before the Lord.
All right, so after 7 days, right, there's mikvah and an offering of 2 birds, and one is pure again, and one comes back into the camp. This is the same thing for the menstruant, right? 7 days, and on the 8th day, right? Now the difference, of course, is that she's going to have it regularly. But what's interesting is if you, I studied anthropology as an undergraduate at Northwestern, cultural anthropology, so it was about people's rites and rituals and tribal, beliefs and experiences. And the red tent, so we talked a lot about women in Aboriginal cultures, in primitive cultures, who had still this practice of being taboo when they are menstruating. In Africa, they live together in a dwelling that is for the menstruants, and the sons or whoever's bringing them food can't even touch. They can't hand the plate to the woman. They have to put the plate on the ground and scoot it towards her, and then she picks it up because it will communicate tumah, right? So the idea that they are taboo. So there is varying degrees of this in different cultures, and that still have this, or that have had this understanding of taboo, of other. And it's interesting that in the anthropological record, there were complaints that women were having their menstrual cycle several times in a month.
Yeah, because they didn't have to work. I mean, it was nice.
So we come with our preconceived ideas about, oh, that's horrible,
No.
right? But for some cultures, women were more than happy, it seems, to have a timeout away from their husbands and children and household duties, where they hung out with other women for a week.
To the spa vacation.
See, it sounds good.
It's a good thing.
A weekend retreat.
A weekend retreat. Margot, wouldn't that be a great idea? A weekend retreat? Let's go.
But only once a year?
Yeah, right. So I just want to remind us that we come with our ideas, but there is in the record an experience of the red tent, if you want to call it that. That's different, right? That's empowering.
So what do the rabbis make of all this?
Bert's so ready to go there. He's so ready to go there. So this goes on. You can read it at home, and it goes on and on and on about the different conditions that, bless you, that cause tzara'at, as well as what the rituals are for recovery from it. So the rabbis, understand the immense power of tum'ah, right? Of this impurity. Of course, without the Levitical system, without the temple, it stops being a normative part of Israelite life early on. But it's so here, it's so powerful that the rabbis want to understand what might be going on in a way that they can bring it forward. So for the rabbis, they look at this word Metzorah, and Hebrew is the Lashon HaKodesh, is the holy language. And it's a deep language, it's a language of depth. I always say it's a language of depth, not breadth. And so they look at this word, Metzorah. My printing's terrible, forgive me. Is it a hay or an olive? So they look at this word, it's an ayin.
It's all right.
They look at this word. I can't spell in English, so this shouldn't surprise you. So they look at this and they think, so what's really going on here? If this is the holy tongue, then there's got to be, this is the language through which the world is created. There has to be something else going on here. This can't just have ended with the temple, God forbid. There has to be something else here. So what do? Reuben, you got any hints?
What does who do?
So what do the rabbis do with this? The Metzorah, the one who has this condition. It's got to mean more than just someone who has leprosy or someone who is impure, because there's so much in Torah about it. It's got to go past the temple. It has to.
Well, it could be tzara, trouble.
Sarah. Okay. They go like this. They break the word in half. Right?
Mitzvah.
Mitzvah.
Motzi.
Ra.
Motzi. Ra. The one who brings forth evil. And what, for the rabbis, is the way that we most normally bring forth evil?
Lashon hara.
Lashon hara. There's got to be a relationship. We got Ra. Well, we know something about Ra, say the rabbis. Right? We know about Ra. The most common word is Lashon hara. Evil speech. The evil tongue. And this is the cause of most destruction in our own communities, in our own times, say the rabbis. This is the number one killer in our time of the spirit and of community and of relationships is gossip. So for them, they carry all of this forward in a way that really talks about the disease of the mouth, the disease of the tongue. And they spend a very long time in the rabbinic literature talking about what constitutes gossip. So, for the rabbis, it's not just that I speak ill of someone, right? It's that you listen. If you listen, you have participated in Lashon Hara. So, and according to the rabbis, I who initiate it have now sinned against you by drawing you into it.
And you're an accessory.
Because I've made someone an accessory. I've sinned against the person I'm talking about, and I've sinned against the Creator. So every time we open our mouths, say the rabbis, let us pay serious attention to whether or not we're going to wrong 3 people or 3 entities.
And it doesn't matter if what you're saying is true.
It does not matter if what you're saying is true.
Wow.
Doesn't matter if it's good or bad.
Frankly, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, say the
So you
rabbis.
can't talk about anybody, period.
You shouldn't be talking about anybody, period.
So what are you talking about?
You can give a compliment to someone's face,
But not behind their back.
but not behind their back. Because the minute I say that Linda Scheibel,
She's something.
she is something. She is unbelievable how much she does for this community. What do I open up?
Criticism.
Want to hear?
What do I open up? Is someone to say, well, you know why she does that. You know, right? So,
Says she drinking from that lovely cup.
says she drinking from that cup of harlotry. Yes.
But I want to tell you something funny. I'm sorry I was late and all that, but this particular Torah portion was the one that I had when I was 13 years old and had my bar mitzvah.
Oh my gosh.
Lovely.
And, I mean, there are lots of different issues in this Torah portion. Nobody would talk to me about them.
Huh.
All I basically learned, other than if I did any digging myself, and as a 13-year-old, I didn't really, was talking about leprosy. But none of any of this, none about the birth issues, none, you know, until 2-3 years ago when I was Torah study, we started talking about it. I said, how come nobody would talk to me about it? Of course,
Yeah.
they were all men, right?
Right. So part of it is that in our Western contemporary thinking, this is embarrassing.
You know.
This is embarrassing. That this whole idea of tum'ah and impurity and from sexuality and blood and mess. First of all, no one wants to go there anyway. No one wants to talk about that, particularly with a 13-year-old. I don't talk about this a lot with 13-year-olds either.
But what you're talking about here and now is certainly worthy of speaking about to a 13-year-old. Because that's the
Absolutely.
age where they start, if not younger, bullying and everything else. I mean, that's
Right.
relevant.
So in terms of speech,
Yeah.
right, understanding Lashon Hara.
I once got off the internet, and I forget who wrote it, something about 10, there were rules for kids about how to avoid Lashon Hara. And I was with some of my grandkids, and I said, gee, let me tell you about this. And we went through the whole thing, and they looked at it, and they said, well, if kids followed this, nobody would talk about anything at school. Because so much of what kids talk about
And it does.
today, I mean, I'm sure it was like that before, no, but I mean, particular kids, it's all about
Somebody else.
talking about other people.
Right?
Rabbi Laura Geller also had this for her 13-year-old bat mitzvah, and she has a column in the Jewish Journal about it this week.
This week?
Yeah,
Okay.
and you'll find it interesting.
Yes, Blanche.
I had a friend who decided she was a gossip, and she decided to prevent that. She will not talk about anybody that's not in the room.
An excellent practice. It's an excellent practice.
Yes.
Because, and if we go on just a speech diet, like, when you start any kind of a diet, and not just for weight loss, but because you're going to try to, like me, try to deal with gluten or whatever. So when you start being vigilant about reading labels, and you start to become very vigilant about noticing and keeping track of what you eat, right? So if we go on a speech diet, if we were that vigorous and that vigilant about watching everything that came out of our mouths, it is staggering.
It becomes a habit.
Staggering the percentage of speech about other people. If we just said we're not going to talk about anybody who wasn't in the room, 9 times out of 10 during the day, you'd have to right. We'd have to stop what we were about to say.
But it might be a good thing.
They might be. The rabbis ask, so why are you talking about it? Maybe it's a good thing I'm talking about Linda Scheibel. But why am I talking about Linda Scheibel?
Can't even imagine.
Why am I talking to Chaim about her?
What if you want to help another person and need the help of somebody to talk with them about it?
Well, so certainly, if it's about helping somebody, certainly. But you'd have to be careful, right? So I would have to be careful about what I say. I don't know what somebody knows about that person's condition, nor do I know what that person with whatever's going on, how much they want other people to know, right? So it's tricky. I would need to go to the person and say, how much of this is public? This happens all the time for us as clergy. We want to help, but we don't know how much. You have to check with the person to know how much they want known. even when you're trying to be helpful.
Sarah,
I bel-
it's okay to talk about the grandchildren.
I believe there is one important, correct me if I'm wrong, there's an important exception, and that is if you have information about somebody that will protect the third party. So if I were talking to person A who said A was going to do a business deal with B, and I knew for sure that B was a crook for some reason, then I would be able, I actually had an obligation to warn A about it.
Right, so
But
you
that
better,
would be the only,
you better be sure they're a crook.
right, right.
In my work at the hospital, we have to honor patients' confidentiality. Because all of a sudden someone starts a rumor, he's got such and such. And all of a sudden the person's halfway dead when they just went out to get a sliver taken out.
Right? Yep. I'm going to read to you from Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, also known as the Velveteen Rabbi. And you can find her stuff online. She's fantastic. Fantastic. Her Passover Haggadah is beautiful. Beautiful. So she talks about having studied this, Parsha for a long time. And then she gave birth to a child. When I read the Torah verses here about how a woman is tameh for 33 or for 66 days after birth, I think of spending my first 2 months of motherhood swimming against the current of postpartum depression. A different kind of tum'ah, which nonetheless separated me from my community. Let me be clear. I'm not saying that that's what the Torah verses are about per se, and I know that every woman's experience is different. But I suspect that many women experience the first 1 or 2 months of motherhood as a different time, an overwhelming time, a time which is set apart from ordinary life. Labor and birth were a one-time thing for me. But I'm blessed now to be able to minister to people through the journey of sickness and death and burial. And I know that every time I touch death in these ways, I come away feeling changed. Changed and charged. Electrified almost. As though I had shed everything extraneous in myself and my life in order to go somewhere very deep. I think that deep place is the same place I touched when I closed my eyes and Drew was born. And I know that every time I go there, it takes a little while for the experience to wear off, as it were. When I emerge back into ordinary life, when the spiritual tingliness wears off, I'm often exhausted, but deeply grateful to have touched those depths. That's how I understand tum'ah now. Tum'ah is the stuff of blood and birth and death and ineffability. Most of us don't live our lives in constant awareness of our blood and our mortality and our deep mystical connection with something beyond, something from which we emerge when we are born and to which we return when we die. But birth and death, blood and semen, and mysterious bodily suppurations are part of this human life. Leviticus offers us one very old framework for understanding these things and how they impact us. So if we carry her observation forward, let's look at Tirza Firestone, Rabbi Tirza Firestone, and remember what we did up here. Somebody want to read from Rabbi Firestone?
Metzorah question.
Wait, we haven't done.
It's coming.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No worries.
The Metzorah question, Dying and Flying, by Tirza Firestone. Every year we have to look at this issue of what is Metzorah. It's so much nicer to read other parshiot, but Metzorah is such a conundrum every year. What is this thing, Metzorah? Is it psoriasis, leprosy, the disease du jour, AIDS, breast cancer? What do we do with it? Is it slanderous tongue? So many different interpretations of this word. So why is this Reb Zalman's chilek portion?
So she's writing a talk. She's giving a shiur. She's giving a lesson in honor of her teacher, the amazing Reb Zalman. And the parsha for the week, in which she's giving this shiur in his honor, is Tazria Metzorah. So she's going to try to make a connection about why on Reb Zalman's, Shabbat Davka is this the chelek? Is this the portion? Go ahead.
One way to look at Metzorah is to see it as a shortened form of two words, matzah ra. Sometimes in the place of what should be sustenance, we found ra.
Good.
Activity.
So that's what we do up here, right? We can either say the one who brings forth ra or matzah, found evil. The one who finds ra. So this is how she's going to play with that. The one who finds, but she's not going to say evil. She's going to say negativity. All right, go ahead.
When we looked into the depth of our birthright and lineage, we found stagnancy instead of running water. We found isolation and separation, not the big view. Matzinu, we found ra, negativity. We are all the Metzorah at one time or another. And so what happens? We have to go literally out of the machana, out of the mainstream. There we are followed by the Kohen, who, for so many of us, is Reb Zalman, our beloved shaman, priest, teacher, friend. He helped us to come from the tight, myopic, clustered vision into a broad expanse, to help us find the windows and the doors in Yiddishkeit through which we could come back in and expand our consciousness. When we read in this Chiluk, really is about that healer and a healing that has happened to so many of us.
All right, she's now going to do a lovely interpretation of the ritual for a woman coming with two birds. One is killed. One is dipped into the blood. The wing is dipped into the blood of the one that was killed, and it is set free. One is sacrificed. The other bird is dipped its wing is dipped in the blood of the one that was sacrificed and is set free. Go ahead.
These are our shamanic rituals, and the one that we have for coming back into camp to bring our riches back into the machana has to do with two birds, a cedar branch, crimson wool, and hyssop along with the running water. Birds are a symbol of the soaring human spirit, the spirit that's alive within us. Notice that we take two. One is saved and one is killed. Why is that? The one that's killed has to do with that part of our spirit which has to be exchanged, sacrificed, so that we can fly free. In order to soar, in order to really have
Mochin de Gadlut,
expanded consciousness, some part of us must be sacrificed. Each one of us knows this in our personal lives, and we certainly know it as a people, as a nation. On the way to being here now, renewing Judaism, we have suffered an incredible loss. One of our birds, the twin bird, has died, and on its wings come us. And having survived this loss, we know that we're never going to be the same. When we have come to consciousness, we know that we are inalterably changed by the sacrifice. Our twin soul, perhaps the innocence in us, or the people that we had to leave in order to be where we are now, is gone. We are marked. And so the Torah tells us in its deep wisdom that our wings are dipped in the blood of our twin soul. That blood is on our wings as we soar. But we do soar, and we're lifted off into the fields to fly free.
a really profound interpretation for me of.
What is her background? Jewish? I mean, I know
She has
she's a rabbi.
She has a very, she has a very interesting autobiography that she wrote. I will lend it to you if you would like to read it. But it is a very, very interesting background, a traditional background, and a break.
But she mentions Yiddishkeit.
She comes from a very traditional background.
Yeah, that's interesting. You can pick it up.
Right? And a very painful journey to where she is now. Very painful.
Is she married to Reuben Firestone?
I think so. No. Different. But for me, what's profound about this are many things. In my own life, just the part that has to be sacrificed to move on, to fly. So much pain associated with that. And we're marked. We fly, and we're marked. We are dipped in the blood of what has to be sacrificed, what has to be left in order to fly. It's a profound teaching on honoring and moving out of that. That we honor it, we carry it with us, but we've got to move. We've got to go.
Now, wouldn't this be an interesting lesson for a 13-year-old to ponder? Or at least on some level?
Possibly. Possibly. And we're going to do a lot more with it tomorrow morning. So you're now our resident expert on the women's retreat, Margot, on this parsha, because we're gonna do something.
Don't ask me any questions.
No, I won't. We're gonna do something with that tomorrow morning in a ritual that's gonna be.
What was the name of the other rabbi that you read from?
Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, and her blog and all of that is called The Velveteen Rabbi.
What? Did you say velveteen?
Do you know the story of the Velveteen Rabbit?
Yeah.
So when can I run and play with the real rabbis? So when she was a rabbinical student, she had this blog called The Velveteen Rabbi. When will I be able to run and play with the real rabbis? And now she's a real rabbi. But she became very widely known as the Velveteen Rabbi because her stuff is so amazing. Sarah, would you do us the favor of reading Metzorah by Ruth, the poet Ruth Bryn? Turn your paper over.
Delight. Leviticus 14:15. Delight. Long after the temple was destroyed and the sages had substituted prayer for sacrifice, the people remembered the rites of purification. The mothers in the ghetto would wave the holiday bird over the heads of their children to atone for sin and evil. We read and we remember and we wonder, how shall we rise above the circumstances of our lives as the living bird rose over the open field? How shall we find words for prayer as pure as the trill of the wild bird singing? Nature demands of the bird flight and song, and how beautifully he sings in the branches, how swiftly he flies the summer skies. O Lord our God, may we do our tasks as well, whether we are required to achieve or to pray, to study or to sacrifice. As we delight in the swoop and glide and ascending arc of the flight of birds, so may you find delight in us when we strive for our own human achievement. Wow. That's gorgeous. Who wrote this?
She is a Minnesota native and lived in Minneapolis. And her name was Ruth Bryn, of blessed memory. She died a few years ago. So she wrote a lot of poetry, but her last collection was published by an independent publisher who was a member of my synagogue in Duluth, called Harvest, because it was published at the end of her life.
I would love to see that.
I will happily give you a copy. And so this is a collection of her. She has a poem on each parsha. So for years in Duluth we would.
What an undertaking.
Right? So we would use her poem of the parsha in our morning davening every Shabbos as part of Psukei de Zimra, as part of our verses of praise.
I think we might all want more of this.
So I will be happy to share it with you.
It's a wonderful book.
Mm-hmm. It is a wonderful book.
I knew her even from when I was a little girl.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And she's in our Siddur, actually. There's a piece of hers in our, it's about Genesis. Hail the hand that scattered space with stars. That's hers. That's hers.
Oh, that's beautiful.